Sit back, relax, and welcome to Reading Hours. Today's book is The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. Please let us know in the comments from where you are watching or if there is a book you want us to summarize in future. First published in 1911, The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett has enchanted generations of readers with its blend of mystery, transformation, and the healing power of nature. Written at the height of Burnett's literary career, the novel stands as one of her most enduring works, beloved by children and adults alike. Set against the backdrop of an isolated Yorkshire manor, the story follows Mary Lennox, a sour and lonely girl who discovers a hidden, neglected garden and, intending it back to life, finds her own path to healing and joy. Burnett herself was a fascinating figure, an English-American novelist who rose from poverty to literary fame, drawing on personal hardships and her fascination with spiritualism, nature, and the resilience of the human spirit. The Secret Garden reflects many of these interests, weaving them into a narrative that explores loss, loneliness, rejuvenation, and the redemptive power of connection. The novel emerged during a period when the idea of mind over matter and the health benefits of fresh air and outdoor activity were gaining popularity, and it subtly critiques the suffocating conventions of adult society through its child protagonists. Over the years, the book has inspired countless adaptations, from stage plays and films to ballets and operas, each seeking to capture the magic that Burnett created. It has also sparked scholarly discussions about its portrayal of colonialism, disability, and class, as well as its deeper symbolism of inner growth mirrored by the garden itself. But at its heart, The Secret Garden remains a timeless tale of discovery, of hidden places, of friendship, and of oneself. As we step into this detailed retelling, let us journey through the desolate corridors of Misselthwaite Manor, wander into the windswept moors, and finally unlock the gate to the garden that has for so long been shut away. Our story begins with a girl who no one wanted, in a world that seemed equally barren. Mary Lennox was a child that most people found it hard to like. She had been born in India to wealthy British parents who cared little for her, more occupied with their own social engagements and comforts than with the daughter they had brought into the world. From the moment of her birth, Mary had been handed off to servants, chiefly her ayah, and taught to be imperious, demanding, and cold. Sickly in both body and temper, she grew up pale, thin, and fretful, accustomed to having her every whim obeyed and knowing nothing of affection or discipline. When at the age of 9, a terrible cholera epidemic swept through her household, it claimed first the servants, then her parents, leaving Mary orphaned and almost forgotten in the chaos. When she was finally discovered, she was found sulking and angry, bewildered by the absence of the people who had once catered to her every desire. With no one in India willing to take her in, she was sent across the sea to England to live with an uncle she had never met, Archibald Craven, master of the great, gloomy Misselthwaite Manor in the wilds of Yorkshire. The journey itself was long and dreary, filled with unfamiliar faces and voices, and Mary, unused to kindness or conversation, withdrew into herself, nursing the sullen resentment that had taken root long before the tragedy that had made her an orphan. Upon arrival at the railway station nearest the manor, Mary was met by Mrs. Medlock, the housekeeper, a brisk, no-nonsense woman who spoke freely of the strange and solitary nature of Mr. Craven. She told Mary in no uncertain terms that the house was vast, with many rooms shut up, and that she would have little company there. Mr. Craven, she said, was a man who preferred to keep to himself, burdened as he was by sorrow and his own physical deformity. A hunchback, that it was whispered, contributed to his melancholic and reclusive disposition. The drive across the moor was unlike anything Mary had ever seen. Gone were the heat and brilliance of India. Instead, there stretched miles of bleak, windswept land, where nothing seemed to grow but coarse grass and gorse bushes, and the wind whistled mournfully through the emptiness. It was a place of strange, stark beauty, but to Mary, it felt as cold and lonely as the life she had known so far. Mrs. Medlock's chatter about the house and its master faded into the background as Mary stared out at the unfamiliar landscape, feeling more isolated than ever. Misselthwaite Manor itself seemed to echo the desolation of the moor. When the carriage arrived at its great front door, Mary was struck by the sheer size and somberness of the building. The house loomed with its many chimneys and dark stone walls, its windows mostly shuttered against the chill. Inside, the corridors stretched on endlessly, lined with old portraits and heavy furniture, the air thick with silence and a sense of things forgotten. Mary was shown to a room that felt as impersonal as the rest of the house, where a fire burned low in the grate and simple furnishings filled the space. The only figure in the house who seemed to take any real notice of Mary was Martha, a young maid from a nearby village. Unlike the servants Mary had known in India, Martha was neither obsequious nor afraid to speak plainly. She talked of the moor, of her large family, and of the outdoor life she loved. At first, Mary could scarcely comprehend Martha's chatter about playing outside and eating hearty Yorkshire food. She was used to a life of being waited on hand and foot, and had never so much as tied her own shoes or dressed herself. But slowly, something in Martha's warm, unaffected manner began to awaken a curiosity in the lonely girl. Mary, left largely to her own devices, began to explore the manor's grounds. The gardens seemed vast and endless, but what caught her attention most was the tale Martha let slip of a walled garden locked up for 10 years, its door hidden and its key buried, a place no one entered since the death of Mrs. Craven. The mystery of this secret garden began to take root in Mary's mind. For the first time in her life, she felt the stirrings of genuine interest, of wanting to know more, to discover something for herself rather than have it handed to her. The days stretched on, and Mary, no longer confined indoors as she had been in India, found herself drawn out into the fresh air. The moor's bleakness began to seem less forbidding, its winds more bracing than bitter. And as her cheeks grew rosier and her step stronger, she began to lose some of the fretful, listless air that had so characterized her before. She encountered a robin, a cheerful, inquisitive little creature that seemed to take an interest in her and that, in turn, delighted her more than she could have anticipated. It was as if this small, living thing was the first to truly see her, and in watching it flit about the garden walls, she felt for the first time the faintest sense of belonging. In the great, empty house with its many shut doors, and out in the windswept world of the moor, Mary Lennox was at the start of a journey she could not yet fathom, one that would draw her not only to the hidden garden but into the hearts of others, and perhaps most importantly, into her own. The morning sunlight was pale as it spilled across the floor of Mary's bedroom, catching the dull gleam of the brass bedposts and the faint patterns of faded wallpaper. The quiet was deeper than anything she had ever known in India, where servants bustled and voices filled the air. Here, there was only the distant ticking of a clock, the occasional sigh of wind against the window panes, and the sound of Martha's cheerful voice as she came to help Mary dress. Martha's chatter about her mother's cottage, the food they ate, the games they played on the moor, wove its way into Mary's mind, settling there like seeds waiting to sprout. At first, she listened stiffly, still resentful of this new life, but slowly her curiosity took hold. As days passed, Mary wandered further outside, driven by something she could barely name. The robin, bright-eyed and bold, continued to appear near her, perching on thorny twigs and cocking its head at her in a friendly, knowing way. Watching it hop from branch to branch brought an unfamiliar sense of gladness to her heart. Its cheerful presence made the huge gardens, so empty and strange at first, feel less forbidding. One day, as she followed the robin across a patch of newly turned earth, she spotted an old, broken piece of a garden tool lying half-buried, as if someone had once tried to work the soil and abandoned it. The robin chirped from a low branch, and Mary felt a sudden, powerful wish to know what had happened there, what had been shut away behind the high walls Martha had described. The mystery of the closed garden began to take on a life of its own in her imagination. She asked Martha about it again, trying to pry details loose, but Martha only repeated that no one went in, that the key had been buried by Mr. Craven himself after his wife's death. That was all anyone knew, or so they claimed. Yet the more she heard, the more Mary was certain there had to be a way inside, and the idea that a secret place existed so close at hand filled her with a longing she could hardly explain. In India, she had been surrounded by hot, crowded, smothering rooms. Here there was a garden, locked away, silent, waiting. One morning, Martha brought her skipping rope from town. Mary had never learned to skip, but the moment she tried, she felt a burst of exhilaration in the movement, the air against her face, the rhythm of jumping and landing on the hard earth. Each day she grew stronger, her cheeks coloring from the wind and her appetite growing enough that Martha praised her for eating like a healthy child. With every hour she spent outside, she began to change, though she didn't realize it yet. The loneliness that had once defined her began to soften, replaced by a sense of purpose. Even the moor, bleak and raw in winter, began to feel like an ally rather than an enemy, and the sharp air seemed to cleanse away her old bitterness. It was on one of these wandering days that Mary, chasing the robin near a tangle of ivy along an old wall, saw something curious. The ivy moved slightly, even though there was no wind. With a racing heart, she stepped closer and saw a tiny ring of rusty metal, almost hidden in the thick stems. The robin perched close by as if encouraging her. Tentatively, she tugged at the ring, pulling it free of the ivy, and there, almost too miraculous to believe, was a key, cold and heavy in her palm. Mary stared at it, hardly breathing. Could it truly be the key to the secret garden? Her heart hammered in her chest as she pushed the key into her coat pocket, suddenly afraid someone would see. It felt like a treasure, like a secret the entire world had forgotten except for her and the robin. That night she lay awake, feeling the cold shape of the key hidden under her pillow, turning possibilities over in her mind until they dazzled her like stars. The next day was bright and brisk, and Mary woke early, determined. She slipped outside as soon as she could, her pulse quickening with every step. The robin was there, waiting, its bright breast gleaming in the sunlight. It flitted along the wall, almost guiding her, until she stood before a weathered, iron-bound door so covered in ivy it was nearly invisible. Her hands trembled as she slipped the key into the lock, half afraid it might snap or refuse to turn, but with a groan of old metal, it yielded. The latch clicked, the door swung inward, and Mary stood, breathless, on the threshold of another world. Inside, the garden lay silent, tangled, and overgrown. Grass grew waist-high in places, brambles twisted over flower beds, and the branches of once pruned roses sprawled wild and unkempt. But beneath the mess, there was a haunting beauty, the bones of a place that had once bloomed in glorious color. The walls still sheltered it from the wind, giving it a hush like a forgotten church. As Mary stepped inside, the robin darted past her, flitting from branch to branch as if it belonged there more than anywhere else. Slowly, she walked through the weeds, touching the rough bark of apple trees, their twisted limbs heavy with lichen. A sense of awe filled her. No one had been here for 10 years, Martha had said, and it felt like a sleeping creature waiting to be woken. Kneeling down, Mary examined the dark soil, crumbling it between her fingers, breathing in its earthy smell. She felt a pull inside her, as if the garden was somehow speaking to her, inviting her to bring it back to life. That afternoon, Martha found Mary more animated than ever, her eyes sparkling with a secret she refused to share. Martha laughed, thinking it was simply the fresh air and the skipping rope working their magic, but Mary held tight to her secret. Each day after, she returned to the hidden garden, slipping in through the ivy-draped door, studying the shapes of broken flower beds, running her hands over the tangled branches of old roses, imagining what colors they might bloom if cared for again. She began to think of how she might start to clear away the dead leaves, how to mend the beds, how to coax life back into the tangled wildness. The garden seemed to be waiting for her, just as she had waited for someone to see her. In its silence, its sleeping loveliness, Mary saw something of herself, neglected but not beyond hope. As she stood among the crumbling walls, the robin hopping at her side, she felt for the first time that she belonged to something greater than herself, a mystery that was hers alone to unravel. In the days that followed, the secret garden became Mary's private kingdom, a place where she felt a new sense of power and freedom. Each morning after breakfast, she slipped away from the great house, making sure no one noticed the small, heavy key hidden inside her coat pocket. The robins seemed to wait for her by the ivy, bright and eager, as if delighted to have a human companion in its quiet, hidden realm. Pushing through the old door, Mary stepped into the sleeping garden, breathing in the earthy scent of tangled grass and fallen leaves. It was still wild and unkempt, but her eyes had begun to recognize its possibilities. She noticed tiny green shoots pushing through the soil, hints of life waking after the long neglect. At first, she only wandered among the overgrown beds, marveling at twisted rose bushes that clung stubbornly to the stone walls, their thorns guarding them like tiny soldiers. She studied the shapes of old hedges, imagining how they might look if they were trimmed and cared for, picturing the flowers that might bloom. Soon, her curiosity transformed into determination. She longed to do something with her own hands, something real and living, far removed from the stifling days in India when servants had done everything for her. Here in this hidden place, there were no servants to scold or spoil her. Here, she could become someone entirely new. It was Martha who gave her the courage to begin. In one of their conversations, Martha spoke of her brother Dickon, a boy of 12 who could charm any animal or plant to life, it seemed. Martha described how he tamed wild creatures and helped things grow with a kind of magic. Mary was intrigued by this idea of a boy so in tune with nature, though she did not yet know what part he would play in her life. For now, she was content to start small, pulling away dead leaves, clearing patches of earth, and breathing in the sharp, fresh scent of exposed soil. In the evenings, she lay in bed thinking of the garden, planning what she would do next, each plan filling her with anticipation. Her mind, once so full of complaints and demands, now turned to hopes and possibilities. She realized she was becoming stronger. The wind on the moor no longer seemed so bitter but brisk and bracing, and her appetite grew each day to Martha's delight. Martha had never seen a child change so quickly, and she told her so with an affectionate laugh, giving Mary a proud feeling she had never known before. One morning, Mary worked up the courage to ask Martha more directly if she might meet Dickon. She was curious about this boy who seemed to belong to the moor, the animals, and the green growing world. Martha agreed to bring him to the manor's gardens one day if he had time, and Mary felt an unexpected thrill at the thought of meeting someone who might understand her secret. In the meantime, she decided to find simple garden tools for herself, rummaging through sheds and corners of the manor's old storage rooms. She discovered a rusty trowel and a small pruning knife, and these tools felt like treasures. Carrying them through the hidden door, she began in earnest to free the beds from choking weeds, her hands working clumsily at first, but with growing skill. She watched worms and insects scuttle away, marveling that the earth was alive even after all those years of neglect. The robin kept close, pecking curiously at the turned soil, singing as if to encourage her efforts. The sense of belonging grew stronger with each hour she spent in that secret space. Sometimes she imagined the lady who had planted the garden long ago, Mrs. Craven, tending the roses with loving hands. It made her feel connected to something that stretched beyond her own life, as if she, too, might one day leave something beautiful behind. One afternoon, as she knelt to pull up a tangle of bramble, she heard a voice behind her that startled her so much she nearly dropped her tool. Turning, she saw a boy standing just inside the doorway, a smile on his sun-browned face, his eyes shining with gentle mischief. It was Dickon, dressed in rough country clothes, carrying a small bag of tools over his shoulder. Beside him trotted a fox, looking tame as a dog, and a crow perched on his arm as calmly as a house pet. Mary stared at him in amazement. Dickon laughed and stepped into the garden as if he had known it all along. His easy way with animals extended to plants as well. Within moments, he was on his knees beside her, praising the bits of green she had uncovered and explaining how to tell a living rose from a dead one. His voice was kind and confident, and Mary found herself opening up to him more quickly than she had with anyone else in her life. They worked side by side until the afternoon light began to fade, Dickon showing her how to loosen the soil around the roots and how to prune gently without harming the plant. Mary was astonished at how naturally he moved among the tangled growth, as if he could hear the garden breathing and answer it with his hands. She told him about finding the key, about the robin who had led her to it, and Dickon nodded as though nothing could have made more sense. He promised to return and help her whenever he could, bringing seeds and tools from his mother's cottage. That promise made Mary's heart soar. She felt as though she had a co-conspirator, someone who shared her fierce determination to bring the garden back to life. When she returned to her room that night, the tiredness in her limbs felt wonderful, the ache of honest work. Her mind was filled with images of green shoots and buds, of Dickon's laughing eyes, and of the way the robin had watched them as if approving. Misselthwaite no longer seemed so lonely, for there was a secret alive within its walls now, a secret that included not only her but Dickon, the robin, and even the old roses themselves. She slept deeply, the kind of sleep that comes to children who have spent their day in wind and sun, and dreamed of blossoms opening, of hidden doors swinging wide, of a world made new. The garden had begun its slow resurrection, and with it, Mary's own heart had started to wake to the possibilities of joy, friendship, and belonging. The pale spring sunlight returned day after day, warming the soil and stirring something restless inside Mary. The secret garden seemed to change before her eyes with each visit, as if the place itself could sense it was being seen again, remembered and cared for after all its long neglect. Mary and Dickon fell into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. Each morning she hurried through breakfast, barely listening to Martha's good-natured chatter, then slipped out across the gardens to the hidden door with its curtain of ivy. Dickon was often already there, kneeling among the weeds with a gentle smile, his hands dirt-streaked and sure. Together they worked side by side, pulling away mats of dead leaves, carefully trimming rose canes, digging around roots so starved they barely held to life. Dickon talked constantly about the magic of growing things, of how plants would wake if given warmth, water, and kindness, just as creatures did. Mary listened with a wide-eyed wonder that had been foreign to her only weeks before. Dickon seemed to carry springtime inside him, his laughter bright as birdsong, and his quiet confidence made her feel stronger, more hopeful. He taught her the names of flowers, showing her how to tell columbines from foxgloves, how to tell when a bud was alive and when it had given up. Mary felt pride in learning these secrets, her mind once stuffed with sour complaints now filled with something richer. They made small discoveries daily, tiny clumps of snowdrops still blooming through the tangles, pale green crocuses just beginning to push through, daffodil bulbs nestled beneath layers of fallen leaves. Each new bit of green seemed like a triumph, a sign that the garden wanted to live again, just as she did. Dickon's gentle creatures became part of their secret world. The fox, whose name was Captain, and the crow, Soot, came with him most days, slipping through the garden as naturally as the robin who first watched over Mary. They seemed to understand they were safe there, that the hidden place was meant for healing and quiet happiness. Sometimes Dickon even brought a baby lamb, so young its bleating voice sounded soft as a child's, and Mary felt a tenderness bloom in her chest when she fed it from a bottle. The walls of the secret garden seemed to hold in the warmth, protecting their green charges from the sharp Yorkshire winds. As the earth softened, Mary's hands grew rougher, stronger, her nails permanently edged with dirt. She didn't mind. Each mark felt like a medal, proof that she was helping the place come back to life. One day as they worked, Mary dared to ask Dickon about her uncle, Mr. Craven. She had only glimpsed him once, a distant figure with a bent back and a face drawn in grief, and she felt a prickle of worry that he might discover their secret and shut the garden away again. Dickon reassured her that Mr. Craven spent most of his days away from Misselthwaite, traveling through Europe, avoiding the house that reminded him so painfully of his lost wife. Mary wondered what kind of man could bury a whole garden out of sorrow, and a strange pity stirred in her, something she could not have imagined feeling before coming to Yorkshire. On a crisp morning, still scented with frost, Mary decided it was time to visit the kitchen gardens and learn more about growing things. With Martha's encouragement, she asked old Ben Weatherstaff, the crusty, sharp-tongued gardener, if she might help him a little. Ben had watched Mary with a suspicious eye at first, but seeing how healthy and sun-brown she had grown, he grudgingly warmed to her. He even allowed her to handle the watering can and taught her to prune some of the hedges around the kitchen plot. It was from Ben, with his dry humor and wise gardener's eyes, that Mary learned even more about what the plants needed and how to coax them from their long sleep. Ben had known about the locked garden for years, though he'd never dared enter after Mr. Craven closed it. Mary sensed that he might suspect something when he saw the brightness in her face, but she was careful not to say too much. It felt as though too many people knowing would break the spell of her hidden paradise. Ben seemed to keep his own secrets too, and there was a silent understanding between them. Days passed, then weeks, until the garden truly began to change. Buds swelled and burst into green, and the first pale blossoms unfurled like tiny banners of hope. The roses especially seemed to remember their old glory, putting out shoots with surprising speed. Sometimes Mary would stand in the middle of it all, eyes closed, feeling the wind, hearing the faint rustle of petals, and imagining Mrs. Craven's voice somewhere in that sweetness, praising her. Through all of it, she changed more than she even realized. Her step grew quick and light, her eyes lost their old, sullen expression, and her laugh, a sound so foreign she barely recognized it at first, came easily. She was no longer the sour, neglected child of India, but a girl of Yorkshire, toughened by wind and warmed by the earth. One afternoon, as Dickon showed her how to plant seeds in neat little rows, Mary spoke of another mystery, one that had begun to nag at her heart, the crying she had heard at night, faint and miserable, echoing through the endless stone halls of Misselthwaite. She had almost convinced herself it was the wind or her imagination, but the sound had returned more than once, unmistakable and human. Dickon looked serious when she told him, and for the first time in their friendship, she saw a worried crease in his brow. He promised to help her find out, though he warned gently that some things were meant to stay hidden if people were too frightened to face them. Still, Mary could not let it go. Now that she had learned how much life could hide beneath the surface, waiting for a chance to bloom, she could not ignore someone who might be locked away in their own misery, just as the roses had been. The thought of that unseen, unhappy voice disturbed her, casting a shadow over her newfound joy in the garden. She resolved that the next time she heard it, she would follow the sound, no matter how dark the corridors of Misselthwaite might seem. As evening fell and she walked back through the archway to the grand house, she felt the old key in her pocket, a comforting weight. The secret garden was alive, growing, waiting for the day when it might show its blossoms to the world again. But beyond its stone walls, there was another secret, hidden even more carefully, and Mary felt a surge of courage at the thought that perhaps she might open that door too and bring light where only darkness had been allowed to grow. Night settled over Misselthwaite Manor with a hush that felt as deep as a held breath. Mary lay in her bed, staring into the gloom, listening to the slow creak of the wind around the great stone walls. Somewhere far off, a branch tapped against a window, but beneath that soft rhythm was something else, the sound she had heard before, a thin, wavering cry, so sorrowful it prickled at her heart. She sat up, breath quickening, and strained to hear, certain now it was no dream. It was a child's cry, distant but real, echoing through the endless, echoing halls. Her resolve hardened like the frost on the moor. She would follow it, no matter how cold or dark the corridors might be. Slipping from her bed, she wrapped a dressing gown around her shoulders and stepped into the passage. The house was a world of shadows, strange and cavernous, with portraits gazing down in the candlelight as if to warn her back. Still she crept forward, the faint wail guiding her along winding halls and through doorways until she came to a heavy wooden door, its handle polished by years of use. The sound was clearer here. Unmistakable, someone was crying behind it, someone who sounded just as lost and lonely as she had once been. Slowly, she pushed open the door and stepped inside. The room was dimly lit by a dying fire, the coals glowing faintly. In the huge bed lay a boy, pale as paper, his hair dark and damp against his forehead. He had the same sharp features as Mr. Craven, but they were twisted in pain and fear. Around him were heavy draperies, suffocatingly rich as if they could smother the life right out of him. He looked up in shock when he saw Mary, his eyes wide and almost feral. "Who are you?" he demanded, voice breaking with both authority and dread. Mary, startled but determined, took a step forward. "I'm Mary Lennox," she said simply. "I live here now." The boy glared at her, his lips trembling. "You shouldn't be here. No one comes in here. Go away." Mary refused to be driven off. She saw in his eyes the same wounded loneliness she had known, a hollowness that went deeper than any illness. "Why are you crying?" she asked, almost gently. At first, he turned away, hiding his face against the pillows, but then, like a dam breaking, the words spilled out. He was Colin Craven, Mr. Craven's only son, hidden away in this great dark room because everyone believed he was too sickly to live. They treated him as if he were dying already, keeping him shut in like a secret no one wanted to see. He wept with bitterness, certain he would grow a hunchback like his father, certain he would die young. Mary listened, her heart twisting, remembering how the world had shut her away with cold neglect too. It made her bolder, fiercer, and she spoke as she never would have dared before. "You won't die," she told him bluntly. "You're just weak because you never go outside. You need fresh air and sunshine like the garden does." Colin stared at her, stunned by her plain words. No one had ever spoken to him like that, as if he were simply a boy and not a fragile piece of glass. Something kindled in his eyes, uncertain but hopeful, and he demanded she tell him more about this garden, this secret place she had found. And so Mary, after a moment of hesitation, began to describe it: the tangled roses waking up, the robin who guided her, the soft green shoots reaching for the sun. As she spoke, she watched the pain in his face ease, replaced by a bright, desperate hunger to see it himself. They made a pact in that darkened room, the sort of wild, brave promise only children could believe in. She would take him there. She would show him that hidden world, that promise of rebirth, and in doing so, perhaps save them both. The next morning, the manor seemed transformed in Mary's eyes. Every hallway, every echoing step now contained a thread connecting her to Colin, binding them together in a new secret. She saw Martha and Ben Weatherstaff, and even Mrs. Medlock differently, as people who had never dared to break the rules of the house the way she and Colin would. She returned to Colin's room in the daylight, determined to see if he had changed his mind, but he was wide awake, propped against his pillows with an excitement that made his pale face glow. He wanted to know everything: how the gate looked, where the robin liked to perch, what flowers were blooming. Mary answered each question carefully, guarding the details of the key but sharing enough to keep his spark alive. Martha bustled in with a breakfast tray, surprised to see Mary perched so comfortably at Colin's bedside. She was even more shocked when Colin insisted Mary stay to eat with him, laughing at how the girl had woken him from what felt like a nightmare. Martha looked between them, astonished, but dared not protest. After all, the change in Colin was obvious. He was sitting upright, talking, his voice steady. Later that day, Dickon joined Mary in the secret garden, and she told him everything in a rush, breathless with urgency. Dickon listened, wide-eyed, then nodded in quiet understanding. "Us'll help him," he promised in his broad Yorkshire accent. "He's no more a cripple in his heart than thee was when thee first came." Those words gave Mary courage, even if a faint worry still lingered. What if they failed? What if Colin truly was too sick? But when she saw Colin again that evening, those worries shrank. His excitement made him stronger, even if only by the smallest degree, and Mary began to believe in this new dream. Together they would break the spell that hung over Misselthwaite, the sorrow that had twisted its halls and left its gardens to ruin. Mary lay awake long after the house had fallen silent, heart pounding with possibilities. She imagined Colin taking his first steps on the soft grass, leaning on Dickon's steady shoulder, breathing in the scent of newly turned soil and opening buds. The secret garden had changed her, and she would help it change him too. Somewhere beyond the manor's stone walls, the robin sang in the dusk, and Mary felt sure that a miracle was already beginning to grow. The days that followed were unlike any Mary had ever known. Colin, once a frightened, fragile boy, seemed to gather strength from the very idea of the secret garden. His eyes, which had been clouded with despair, now sparkled with a new light, a mixture of hope, curiosity, and something close to joy. Though still weak and often breathless, he began to dream of running freely across the moor, of feeling the wind lift his hair and the sun warm his face. Mary, by his side, became not just a friend but a fierce advocate for his healing, determined to unlock the walls that kept him confined both physically and in his own mind. But it was not easy. Colin's world had been shaped by years of caution and fear, told over and over by doctors and servants that he was fragile, delicate, and destined for sickness. His body, thin and pale, showed the marks of neglect and illness, and more than once he doubted the promises Mary made. "I can't run," he said, voice cracked with pain. "I'll never be like other boys." Mary, who had once been sour and lonely herself, refused to accept such defeat. She reminded him of the garden, where the dead and broken things had begun to bloom again through patience and care. "You're not broken," she told him firmly. "You just need to grow like the roses. You'll get stronger. We'll help each other." Slowly, with Dickon's help, they began the work of turning hope into reality. Dickon brought more animals to the garden, each one a tiny teacher of courage for Colin, a baby lamb, a shy hare, even a badger who lumbered in at dusk. Colin delighted in watching the creatures, learning their rhythms and trusting their quiet companionship. He practiced sitting upright in the garden chair, then standing with Dickon's steady hand at his back, each small movement a victory. Mary's own transformation was complete, no longer the spoiled and sullen child who had arrived from India. She was now a bright, capable girl whose laughter filled the hidden garden with light. Her hands, dirt-streaked and calloused, worked tirelessly, turning soil and planting seeds, coaxing life from the earth as if by magic. Her voice, once sharp and commanding, softened with kindness, especially when she spoke to Colin, encouraging him as a sister would. At night, the great manor echoed with the silence of long-held secrets, but in the garden, life stirred anew. Colin's strength grew imperceptibly at first, a quickening pulse in his limbs, a steadiness in his breath. The doctors who visited, called by the anxious Mr. Craven, pronounced him frail but hopeful, unaware of the secret garden's role in his slow resurrection. One afternoon, as the sun filtered through the budding branches, Colin surprised Mary and Dickon by standing alone, albeit shakily, in the center of the garden. His face was pale but determined. "I want to try walking," he said, voice barely above a whisper but full of resolve. Dickon took Colin's arm, steady and patient, while Mary watched with breath held tight. Step by careful step, Colin moved across the soft earth, his feet finding balance as if remembering something long forgotten. When he took the first full stride without support, a joyous cry burst from Mary's lips, and Dickon's smile shone wide as the Yorkshire sky. It was a beginning, small but powerful, a promise that sickness and sorrow would not have the final word. The garden, once secret and locked away, was now a place of healing and hope, a symbol of the strength that could be found even in the darkest of places. Yet beyond the garden's walls, shadows still lingered. Mr. Craven's grief was a heavy weight on the manor, a silent storm that none could easily break. When he learned that his son was up and walking, his first reaction was disbelief, tinged with fear. Could hope be real after so many years of loss, or was it simply a cruel illusion? Mary and Colin's friendship deepened as they faced these challenges together. Colin confided his fears to Mary, of disappointing his father, of never truly belonging, of the cruel expectations that shadowed his every breath. Mary shared her own story of neglect and loneliness, of the strange journey that had brought her from India to Yorkshire and into this secret world. Their bond was forged in understanding, the kind of deep connection that changes the course of lives. One misty morning, Mr. Craven appeared unexpectedly in the garden, his tall figure shadowed and stiff. He watched silently as Colin, unsteady but smiling, showed his father the patch of earth where the first roses had bloomed that year. For a long moment, Mr. Craven said nothing, his eyes fixed on the boy who had seemed so fragile and now stood before him, alive and eager. Then, with a quiet sigh that seemed to carry years of sorrow and hope, he reached out, touching Colin's shoulder with a trembling hand. Tears filled his eyes as he spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "You've given me a miracle, lad." That day, the walls of Misselthwaite Manor seemed to grow lighter. The secret garden, once a place of solitude and silence, had become a beacon of life and renewal for a family long broken by grief. Mary, Colin, and Dickon continued their work together, their laughter and labor weaving new stories into the fabric of the house and grounds. The robin sang in the hedges, the fox padded softly through the undergrowth, and the garden blossomed in ways no one had dared hope for. In the heart of that wild, secret place, 3 children found strength in friendship, courage in change, and the simple truth that sometimes the most hidden places hold the greatest miracles. The turning of the seasons painted the world outside Misselthwaite Manor in ever-changing hues, but within the secret garden, spring's arrival was nothing short of a revelation. Flowers, once strangled by neglect, now unfurled their petals boldly, casting bursts of color against the stone walls. Mary, Colin, and Dickon moved through the garden like caretakers of a fragile, awakening world, their hands busy with pruning, planting, and nurturing, their spirits buoyed by every green shoot and delicate bloom. The air itself seemed to pulse with new life, carrying the songs of birds and the faint hum of bees returning to their ancient tasks. Colin's transformation was nothing short of miraculous. The boy who had once cowered behind heavy curtains, pale and frail, was becoming a creature of the outdoors, stronger in limb and spirit, his laughter ringing freely across the garden's quiet corners. With each passing day, he walked further and faster, encouraged by Dickon's steady presence and Mary's unwavering belief. Together, they explored the borders of the garden, where the wild moorland stretched out beyond the manor's reach, an untamed expanse that once might have frightened Colin, but now seemed filled with promise. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, the children sat beneath an ancient oak, their hands busy weaving garlands of wildflowers. Colin, flushed with exertion and excitement, spoke with a quiet wonder about the world beyond the garden walls, The moors and woods he longed to explore, the animals he wished to meet, the freedom he dreamed of tasting. "I want to see it all," Colin said softly, his eyes bright with longing. "The moor, the hills, the far fields. I want to run like the foxes, climb trees like the squirrels, and be as wild as the wind." His voice carried the innocent yearning of a child discovering a whole new world. Mary smiled, her heart swelling with affection and hope. "And you will," she promised, squeezing his hand. "We'll make sure of it. You'll be strong and free, and nothing will hold you back." She glanced at Dickon, who nodded, his gaze steady and sure. Together, they were building not just a garden, but a life. The arrival of summer brought new challenges and adventures. The garden demanded constant care, and the children learned to work as a team, watering, weeding, and protecting their sanctuary from the unpredictable weather. The once crusty Ben Weatherstaff, who had watched their efforts with a skeptical eye, found himself quietly impressed by their determination and the garden's revival. Sometimes he would offer a gruff word of advice or a helping hand, his gruff exterior softening beneath the influence of their shared purpose. Mary also noticed subtle changes in the manor itself. The heavy, oppressive atmosphere that had settled over Misselthwaite seemed to lift, if only slightly. The house no longer felt like a prison, but a place where healing could begin. Mrs. Medlock's stern demeanor softened when she saw the children's bright faces, and even Mr. Craven, though still distant and haunted, allowed moments of tenderness and hope to slip through his guarded expression. Yet, despite these joyful strides, the shadows of the past still lingered. Colin's fears, though less frequent, sometimes returned like unwelcome ghosts. He worried that his body might betray him again, that he would disappoint those who believed in him, that he might never fully escape the sickly child others had imagined him to be. Mary, with her newfound strength and compassion, stood by him during these moments, reminding him of all they had accomplished and the promise of the secret garden. One evening, as twilight settled over the manor, Mary found Colin sitting alone in the garden, staring at the darkening sky. His face was thoughtful, tinged with the familiar worry. "Do you think I'll ever be normal?" He asked quietly, his voice barely above the breeze. Mary knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You're more than normal," she said firmly. "You're brave and strong and full of life. The garden made us both better, but it was you who did the hard work. I'm proud of you." Colin's lips curled into a small, grateful smile. "Thank you, Mary. I couldn't have done it without you and Dickon." Their friendship, forged in the secret corners of the garden, had become an unbreakable bond, one of trust, courage, and mutual understanding. Together, they had discovered that healing was not just about the body, but about the heart and soul. As summer deepened, the garden flourished like never before. Roses climbed the trellises in proud display, sweet peas wove through the lattice, and the air was thick with the scent of jasmine and honeysuckle. Butterflies danced among the blossoms, and the robin continued to sing its cheerful song, a symbol of hope and renewal. With the garden's rebirth, Mary's own sense of belonging blossomed fully. She was no longer the lonely, sour child who had arrived from India, but a girl who had found friendship, purpose, and a place to call home. The garden was not just a secret haven, but a symbol of transformation for herself, for Colin, and for the once sorrowful manor. One bright morning, a letter arrived at Misselthwaite Manor, carried by a messenger from London. It was addressed to Mr. Craven, but Mary was the first to see it. She recognized the handwriting instantly. Her own mother's old friend, a woman who had once known the Cravens well. The letter spoke of distant relatives and long-lost family connections, of the hope that Colin might soon be able to visit London and experience the world beyond Yorkshire. The news stirred a mix of excitement and apprehension in the household. For Mary and Colin, it was a glimpse of a future filled with possibilities they had never dared to imagine. It meant stepping beyond the garden walls, beyond the safety of Misselthwaite, and into a larger, wider world. That evening, as the children sat beneath the stars, they spoke of dreams and plans. Colin vowed to continue growing stronger, to walk and run and play as any boy should. Mary promised to stand by him, no matter where their paths might lead. The secret garden had given them more than life and health, it had given them hope. And as the night deepened around Misselthwaite Manor, the three friends, Mary, Colin, and Dickon, felt ready to face whatever the future held together. The garden's magic was no longer a secret. It was a living testament to the power of care, courage, and the indomitable spirit of youth. And in its blooming heart, a new story was just beginning. The summer days grew longer and warmer, and with the changing light, the secret garden blossomed into a vibrant world of color and life. Mary, Colin, and Dickon spent hours beneath the canopy of leaves and climbing roses, their laughter mingling with the hum of bees and the sweet songs of birds. The once neglected garden had become a sanctuary, not only for plants and animals, but for the children themselves, who found there a place to grow alongside the blooms. Colin's health and confidence improved steadily. No longer confined to the heavy bed that had once imprisoned him, he walked more firmly each day, sometimes even running short distances with Dickon's encouraging presence. Mary watched these moments with a proud and tender heart, knowing the boy who had been so frightened and weak was becoming a strong and spirited companion. The transformation was as much in their spirits as in their bodies. Both had shed the heavy cloaks of loneliness and sorrow that had once defined them. Dickon's deep knowledge of nature continued to be a guiding light for both children. He showed them how to care for the plants in every season, explaining the subtle needs of each flower and tree. He taught them the importance of patience. That growth, whether in gardens or in people, could not be rushed but must be nurtured with kindness and time. Mary found herself listening eagerly, her mind hungry for the wisdom and peace that seemed to flow naturally from Dickon's connection to the earth. As the garden flourished, so too did the friendships within Misselthwaite Manor. Even Ben Weatherstaff, gruff and solitary, softened at times, offering small smiles and reluctant praise for the children's efforts. Mrs. Medlock, once strict and formal, seemed less stern, perhaps sensing the quiet joy that now filled the house. Even Mr. Craven, though often distant and burdened by old grief, could no longer deny the change in his son and the light that Mary had brought into their lives. One afternoon, as the children rested beneath the shade of a spreading chestnut tree, a messenger arrived bearing news from London. Mr. Craven had received word that arrangements were being made for Colin to travel to the city for his first extended visit outside the manor. The idea filled the household with both excitement and anxiety. For Colin, It was a chance to step beyond the protective walls of Misselthwaite and experience the world beyond the moors. For Mary, it meant facing the possibility of separation from the boy she had come to care for deeply. As preparations were made, Mary and Colin found themselves growing quieter, their thoughts turning inward. One evening, after the day's work in the garden, Colin spoke softly, his gaze distant. "Do you think I'll be able to face London? Will I be strong enough to meet the people who have only known me as a sickly boy?" His voice trembled with uncertainty. Mary took his hand firmly. "You are stronger than you think," she said with conviction. "You have the garden and you have us. We'll always be with you, even when you're far away." Her words seemed to comfort him, though the flicker of doubt lingered in his eyes. The journey to London was a momentous occasion. Colin was wrapped warmly and helped into the carriage, his heart pounding with a mix of excitement and fear. Mary and Dickon stood by the manor gates, waving until the carriage disappeared down the winding road. The manor felt emptier without Colin's bright presence, but Mary found solace in the secret garden, tending the beds and watching the roses bloom as she waited for his return. During Colin's absence, Mary and Dickon deepened their connection to the land and to each other. They explored further into the moors, finding hidden valleys and ancient trees, sharing stories and laughter beneath the vast Yorkshire sky. Mary's appreciation for the natural world grew, and with it, her sense of belonging and peace. Colin's time in London proved both challenging and rewarding. Away from the shelter of the manor and the magic of the garden, he encountered a bustling city full of unfamiliar sights and sounds. Yet, buoyed by the strength he had found at Misselthwaite and the encouragement of his new friends, he faced these challenges with courage. Letters from Colin arrived frequently, filled with tales of his adventures and reassurances of his improving health. Back at Misselthwaite, Mary continued to nurture the garden with care and devotion. Each flower that bloomed, each new leaf unfurling in the sun, felt like a message of hope carried across the miles to Colin. The robin remained a faithful companion, its song a reminder of the secret that had changed everything. One late summer day, as the sun cast a golden glow over the garden, a carriage approached the manor gates. Mary's heart leapt as Colin stepped down, taller and stronger than she had last seen him. His smile was bright, and his eyes sparkled with the excitement of homecoming. The reunion was warm and joyful, their laughter ringing through the garden as if it had always belonged there. Together again, the children resumed their adventures with renewed vigor. Colin's return marked a new chapter, one filled with endless possibilities and the promise of a future shaped by friendship, courage, and the healing power of nature. As the garden continued to thrive, so did the lives it touched. Misselthwaite Manor, once a place of sorrow and secrets, had become a home where hope blossomed alongside roses, where children learned to believe in miracles, and where the promise of spring lived forever in their hearts. The crisp air of early autumn wrapped itself around Misselthwaite Manor, and the secret garden began to change once again. The vivid summer blooms gave way to the softer hues of fading leaves, the brilliant greens mellowing into golds and ambers. Yet, even as the seasons shifted, the garden remained a sanctuary of life and hope, a place where time seemed to slow and heal. Mary, Colin, and Dickon moved through this transformed landscape with a quiet reverence, aware that their hidden world was a fragile treasure not just of earth and flower, but of friendship and courage. Colin's strength had grown remarkably. The sickly boy who had once been confined to a bed, shrouded in fear and doubt, now walked confidently through the garden paths, his steps sure and light. He embraced the freedom he had found, exploring the grounds and the moor beyond with a curiosity and joy that had once seemed impossible. Mary watched him with a mixture of pride and tenderness, marveling at how far he had come, how the garden had been the soil from which his new life had sprouted. Yet the changes were not merely physical. Colin's spirit had been renewed, his heart unburdened by the weight of pity and expectation. Where once he had seen only limitations, he now glimpsed possibility. His laughter rang clear across the garden, and his eyes held a light that no illness could dim. Together with Mary and Dickon, he had woven a new narrative, one of growth and resilience. Dickon remained a steadfast guide, his knowledge of the natural world seeming almost magical. He spoke often of the cycles of the earth, the fall and rebirth, the balance between decay and renewal. "Everything has its time," he told Mary one afternoon as they raked leaves into piles beneath the apple trees. "Just like the garden, we grow and change, but there's always new life waiting under the old." His words echoed in Mary's mind, a gentle reminder that endings were but beginnings in disguise. The children spent long days outdoors, gathering apples, pressing leaves between the pages of books, and watching the animals prepare for the coming winter. The fox captain still roamed the edges of the garden, his sleek coat blending into the golden grasses. The robin continued its cheerful song, a constant companion through the shifting seasons. Even the moor seemed less wild, tamed by the children's presence and the magic they had breathed into the land. Back inside the manor, the atmosphere had softened. Mr. Craven, once a figure of distant sorrow, began to emerge from his isolation. The sight of Colin's transformation stirred a hope in him that had long been buried beneath grief. He spent more time with his son, tentatively bridging the gap that years of pain had created. Mrs. Medlock and the other servants, too, seemed to respond to the changes, their smiles less guarded, their steps lighter. One crisp morning, Mary found herself standing before the grand house, the garden key heavy in her hand. She thought of all that had happened, the locked door, the neglected garden, the lonely boy who had once cried behind closed curtains. It seemed almost unbelievable that such sorrow could be transformed into such joy. That day, Colin made a decision. Encouraged by Mary and Dickon, and by the quiet strength that had grown within him, he resolved to face the world beyond Misselthwaite. The manor's halls had once seemed like a prison, but now they felt like the threshold to new adventures. He wanted to attend school, to learn and play alongside other children, to claim a life that had once been denied him. Mary was both proud and wistful. She knew their friendship would change with distance, but she also understood that this was part of the growth they all needed. "You'll do wonderfully," she assured him, her voice steady despite the flutter in her heart, "and I'll always be here, just as you'll be in my heart." The children spent their remaining days together in the garden, savoring each moment as if it were a precious jewel. They talked of the future, of dreams waiting to be chased, of places yet unseen. The garden had given them more than health and happiness. It had given them the courage to embrace life in all its unpredictability. When the time came for Colin to leave, the farewell was bittersweet but full of hope. Mary and Dickon stood with him at the manor gates, watching as the carriage carried him away toward the next chapter of his life. The garden, vibrant and alive, stood as a testament to the power of friendship, love, and perseverance. Mary returned to her favorite bench beneath the old oak tree, her fingers tracing the worn bark as she reflected on all that had changed. The secret garden was no longer just a hidden place. It was a living memory, a symbol of what could be achieved when kindness and determination met. As the wind stirred the falling leaves around her, Mary understood that the garden's magic would endure, not just in the blossoms or the bird song, but in the hearts of those who had nurtured it back to life. And with that knowledge, she felt ready to face whatever the future might bring, carrying the garden's lessons with her always. The golden light of autumn deepened as the days grew shorter and cooler, casting long shadows across the lawns and hedges of Misselthwaite Manor. Yet within the secret garden, the late season blooms clung stubbornly to life, a vivid contrast to the fading world beyond its stone walls. Mary found herself lingering among the flowers more often now, as if the garden held answers she was only beginning to understand. It was no longer merely a place of play or healing. It had become a symbol of transformation for the land, for the manor, and most of all, for herself and Colin. With Colin now preparing to leave Misselthwaite to attend school, Mary felt a complex mixture of pride and sadness. Their friendship, forged in the quiet magic of the garden, had been a lifeline for both of them. She knew the path ahead would be full of new challenges for Colin, a wider world, strangers, expectations, but she also knew he was ready. He had grown in body and spirit, nourished by the earth, the animals, and the unwavering support of friends who believed in him. Mary's own journey had been just as profound. From the lonely, willful child who arrived at the manor shrouded in neglect and bitterness, she had blossomed into someone capable of kindness, courage, and deep empathy. The secret garden had taught her that healing often begins with small acts of care, turning soil, whispering encouragement, noticing the first fragile bud amid the dead leaves. It had taught her that the past need not define the future, and that even the most hidden places can burst into light when tended with love. The garden's magic was not a spell cast once and forgotten. It was a living, breathing force sustained by those who believed in renewal. Mary reflected on the robin that had first led her there, the fox and the badger who had come quietly as companions, and the soft, steady presence of Dickon, whose deep understanding of the natural world seemed almost otherworldly. Together, they had woven a tapestry of friendship and growth that extended beyond the garden walls, touching everyone at Misselthwaite Manor. As the final leaves fell and the garden prepared for winter's rest, Mary took one last walk through its winding paths. The roses, though past their prime, still bore the memory of summer's glory. The air was crisp and carried the faint scent of earth and moss. Standing beneath the ancient oak, Mary felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for the garden's beauty, but for the journey it had inspired. Her thoughts turned to Colin and the life he was about to embrace beyond the manor. She hoped he would carry the lessons of the garden with him, the resilience to face hardship, the courage to step into the unknown, and the belief that even when things seem bleak, growth is possible. She promised herself she would write to him often, sharing news of the garden's seasons and the small miracles that continued to unfold. Mary also knew that her own story was far from over. The secret garden had opened a door to a larger world, one where she belonged, where her voice mattered, and where she could choose kindness over bitterness. The once lonely girl was now a young woman filled with hope and purpose, ready to face life's challenges with the strength she had found in the earth beneath her feet. As she made her way back to the manor, the first snowflakes began to drift from a pale gray sky, dusting the garden in soft white. The garden would sleep through winter, gathering strength for the next spring. And so would she. The secret garden was more than a place, it was a promise that no matter how deep the darkness, life can be rekindled. That friendship can heal wounds that time alone cannot. That courage and love can unlock even the most tightly closed doors. In the heart of Yorkshire, behind stone walls and beneath wild roses, Mary Lennox had discovered a truth that would stay with her forever. Sometimes, the most extraordinary magic is found in the simplest acts of care and the bravest choice to believe in new beginnings. And with that truth carried quietly in her heart, Mary stepped forward into the unfolding story of her life, ready to bloom wherever she was planted. The secret garden endures as a timeless and deeply moving tale because it reminds us of the miraculous power of change, love, and resilience. Frances Hodgson Burnett's story shows that even the most neglected hearts, like the abandoned garden itself, can blossom again with a little courage, friendship, and hope. Through Mary's transformation from a sour, lonely child to a kind and compassionate girl, and Colin's journey from fear and weakness to health and confidence, we see how nature and nurturing can heal wounds that seem beyond repair. The hidden garden becomes more than a patch of earth behind locked walls. It becomes a living symbol of the renewal that is possible for every soul willing to open itself to growth. For readers across generations, the secret garden remains a gentle yet powerful reminder that no one is beyond saving, and no place is beyond restoring, so long as someone cares enough to try. Its message is one of quiet optimism that even when life appears bleak and all doors seem shut, there is always the possibility of finding a hidden key, of rediscovering light, of beginning again. In sharing this summary with your audience, may the story of Mary, Colin, Dickon, and their wondrous garden continue to spark hope, wonder, and the belief that transformation is always within reach, if only we dare to seek it.